Hello guys, and in this video we're going to continue talking about compression. So I'm going to go ahead and open up DraftSight, and I'm also going to open up Google Earth. Let me go ahead and open up the project and open up Google Earth. If the audio sounds a little different in this video, it's because I'm actually out here in the training room right now. Yeah, let me minimize that. So in the last video we just briefly talked about what it would mean to to double, like here, we figured out roughly that I could model 8/10 of a mile if I did not compress the railroad at all. So if we wanted to double that, obviously that'd be 1.6 miles, and we drew that on the screen and we saw what that looked like. But here I want to talk about actually coming up with a compression ratio that will work for you. So let me open up a text editor here. Okay, so this is a little formula that I've come up with. So this scale miles, that 0.8, that denotes the example that we're using here, my railroad. So that's where that number came from. For you, that number is going to be different. The CR, that represents the compression ratio. So how much you're wanting to take, or let me give you a real case scenario. The Nashville and Eastern Railroad, which is what this is. We want to model a certain section of the railroad, but we want to compress it by 60%. That's what this right here denotes, that 0.60. So, but what that means is that if you compress something by 60%, you're making it 60% smaller. So that only leaves you 40% to actually really model. Now I say that with a disclaimer, that 40%, that remainder, that only is applicable if there's a one-to-one mapping on your layout. Okay, well, what does one-to-one mapping mean? Well, that means nothing more than what you model is going to be to scale. So if you're only able to model, say you're only able to model 40% of a particular section of a railroad, and there's a building out there, and that building is 87 feet wide. Okay, so and you're working in HO scale. Well, a one-to-one mapping would mean on your layout, the actual model of that building, it's 1 foot, right? Because our scale for HO is 1 foot equals 87 feet. So basically that means you're taking the portion of the railroad that you are able to model, and you're not compressing that at all, you're not changing it at all, you're modeling to scale exactly what's out there. I hope that's clear, because that is a factor, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. I don't want this to be like a rigid formula, because it's not. This is just a way to quantify. It's a way for us to quantify a ratio, or let me back up. It's a way for us to quantify proportionally the ratio that we've selected that we're actually going to be prototyping. So back on this formula here, let me open up my calculator program. So the formula is actually really easy. It's just your scale miles divided by 1 minus your compression ratio. Well, we know that 1 minus 0.6 is going to be 0.4, right? So let me go ahead and type in my 0.8 for my miles and divide that, and we'll use parentheses here. 1 minus 0.6, which we know to be 0.4. So that means if I compressed a section of the Nashville and Eastern Railroad short line, if I compressed it 60%, then I can model, let me take this back. Well, I can model the 2 miles if I wanted to. But if I'm holding to the standards of a one-to-one mapping, that means I would be able to model 40% of that 2 miles. Okay, let's do another one here. So if I wanted to compress a section of the railroad 70%, which, you know, obviously that number's greater than that one, that's a greater compression. That means if, you know, if we try to model a one-to-one mapping, we can really only model 30% of what's out there. So let's go ahead and take that number. So that'd be 0.8 divided by, in the parentheses again, 1 minus 0.7, which, you know, math in your head is 0.3, right? So that means, you know, I could model 2 and 2.67 miles, you know, if we round up. The last example here, you know, 40% compression, which is less than our original, you know, 50% that we had talked about. So that would be 0.8 divided by 1 minus 0.7, yeah, which we know to be 0.3, right? But hang on, that's not the example I wanted to use, is it? 0.8 divided by 1 minus 0.4, which we know to be 0.6. So there we go, it's 1.3 miles. So see, we're not compressing as much, so this 1.3 approaches this 0.8. You can see that. You know, if we only went 30%, then it'd be even closer to 0.8. So that's the little formula here that I've come up with. Now, again, I don't want, maybe you're in the camp of, I do want to model, you know, a one-to-one mapping. I want to model exactly what's out there. Then, yeah, you could be rigid with this formula. But as we'll see here in a minute, you know, only being able to model 40%, that's not necessarily true. Again, it would be true if there was only a one-to-one mapping. But as we'll see here in a second, there's a way that, you know, okay, here you go. So you take the 87-foot building, and that's part of your, you know, part of one of the scenes that you're going to model. Well, you know, you can compress that building down, you know, so many feet and scaled feet anyway, and still convey or still make the building look like what's actually out there. So, you know, so there's a way to, you know, even compress your scenes and be able to get more in than just 40%. Again, this is just quantifying some numbers for us so that we can proportionally go into you know, our Google map and start looking at what areas we may want to get. So with that said, you know, I guess I'll use this one as the example here. So, you know, we figured that up, and I think it was 2 miles, right? So that's 0.8 divided by 1 minus 0.6, which is 0.4. Yeah, 2 miles. I mean, if you do the math in your head, it's just 0.8 divided by 0.4, right? 2 miles. Okay, so let's get back to our Google map. And okay, so remember, if you want to look at the map orthographically, hold down the control button and simultaneously click the left mouse button and just push upward, and then you can hold down the left mouse button and pan. So that line was drawn at 1.6, right? So let's go ahead and just turn that off and come back into our ruler, and let's draw another path here. Make sure it's in feet or miles, and let's just go ahead and start selecting an area. So we're going to go 2 miles for this path, right? So again, I'm not trying to get exact here. When I get ready to actually start the prototype process and just not do an example, then I would want to, you know, I'd want to zoom in all the way and get as close as I could to the actual track location. Let's see, 1.28. So we're going 2 miles, right? Oh, okay. That puts us, this, I think this is a water treatment plant right here. So if I compressed this section of the Nashville and Eastern Railroad 60%, then I could model 2 miles. I'm interested in 2 miles. So what that means is that now you got to remember from our formula here, we can actually, if there's a one-to-one mapping, we can actually only model 40% of that. Okay, so what I wanted to show you guys, well, before I do that, let me just say something here real quick. Get back to the orthographic view. You know, when you compress a railroad, people think of, okay, well, when I compress a railroad, I'm just compressing, you know, from point A, you know, all the way to point B, and I'm just going to shorten the railroad. And, you know, that's only half true. You know, you compress perpendicular to the railroad right away as well, right? So, you know, like for my layout, you know, my shelf is 2 foot off the wall, right? So since I'm a HO scale, that's 2 times 87 feet. So that's 174 feet. So yeah, 174 feet. So if we come in here and we draw, a circle, okay, just kind of in the middle of our railroad right away, and we make the radius 87 feet, and we'll get as close as I can here. That'll work, because the diameter is 174, right? So if we did not compress at all and we modeled a one-to-one mapping, that's, you know, that's where you can model. That's what you would model. Now, obviously, on your railroad, you know, you're going to want to pick up features, like you may want to pick up this building and, you know, maybe this parking lot for this industrial site over here. Well, you know, there's nothing that says you can't, so you can compress this way too, you know, in order to bring that building up into your scene and bring that parking lot down into your scene. So you probably want to keep that in mind as well. Now, there's some things that you wouldn't want to compress, like you wouldn't want to compress the railroad right away, right? You know, you wouldn't want to compress, you know, a road. If it's a 2-lane road and just say it's 24 feet from, you know, this edge of pavement to this edge of pavement, I don't know, you might be able to compress that just a little bit, but, you know, you don't want to compress it, you know, and you're putting, you know, your model cars out there, you know, you want it to look realistic, right? So things like roads, you probably wouldn't want to compress. Things like buildings, you can compress, you know, as long as they don't have a lot of physical features on them, you know, and like a lot of windows and doors, and you're having to drop windows and doors just to compress the building, you know. Well, you can do that. It's up to you, you know, if you wanted to do away with that much detail. Things like parking lots, like this parking lot right here, you know, we could compress that. You know, we can shorten that up. Well, things like railroad overpasses and things, you know, you could compress that. You know, make the bridge shorter. There's a nice long parking lot, you know, we could compress, especially this area right over in here, because there's not a lot happening. We could compress that. You know, definitely the stretch of woods, you know, you could compress that. You know, if you're willing to, you know, give that up in your scene. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that as well. You know, you don't only compress, you know, from point A to point B, you also compress perpendicular to the right of way. So let's get back over here to, and I'm going to save this real quick. I'm going to save that as 2 miles. Okay. And you know what? It took my line off. I'm probably going to have to draw it again. Let me just delete that and redraw it and save it again. Okay, we'll go out here. So let me take a second. So tools, ruler, make sure I'm in miles there. And I'll come in here and just click there. Path miles. There we go. Sorry about that, guys. I didn't realize I was still in circle command there. So start drawing our path here. Went out. I think it went out beyond the. Let me zoom out here so we can get to moving a little quicker. Yeah, went out past the water treatment plant. I think that's what that is. I know the, let me say that. I know the Railroad Museum here in Nashville is like right over here. It's one of these buildings over in here. And I took my son and my nephew. I was highly disappointed. I wish there was more support here in Nashville. But yeah, if you're watching this video and you know someone who is affiliated with that in any way, or you're affiliated with it, you know, sure would be nice to have a better museum. But anyway, so what we're going to do now is we're going to take this portion of our railroad, and I'm going to actually, well, let's see here. If that so we know that actually I think it measured out 1.99 miles, right? So if we take 1.99 and multiply that times 5,280, that gives us 10,507. Keep that in mind, okay, because we're going to come back to that. I'll show you why here in just a second. So what we want to do is we want to take this path here that we've created, and we want to bring this image into our draft site program. So the way you do that, let's see, file, save, save image, and you can type in some stuff up here if you want. I'm just going to take the defaults. I'm going to go ahead and click save image, and I'm just going to put it on my desktop, and I'm just going to call it 2 miles. Okay, so now we should have that image on our desktop, and yeah, there it is. Okay, so open your draft site back up. And so probably what you would want to do, let's create another layer, and let's just call it Google Maps. And you can just leave the color white. Let's go ahead and make it the active layer though. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to import that image into this CAD program. So go ahead and go over to Insert, come down to Reference Image, and find your image. And you should get the preview here, and select OK, and then just select somewhere here on the screen. Don't specify a scale, just go ahead and hit enter. Okay, so this is not going to be to scale. That's what this number's going to be used for here. So what we want to do is we want to come back and retrace our path using a polyline. So type in PL for polyline, and again, you don't have to get exact on this. I mean, you can get it as exact as you want, but for our purposes for demonstration, I'm just going to kind of loosely get this number here. Okay, so when we brought the image in, it's plotting up 10.95 feet. Well, obviously that's a far cry from 10,507. Okay, so we need to take that 10,507.2 and divide that by this number here, this 10.9531. So divided by 10.9531, and that gives us a scaling ratio. You can right click right here and hit copy if you've been using the calculator here. So I'm going to copy that number, or you could just type it in, hit escape there, so I'm not selecting the polyline. But now I'm going to issue the scale command, which was SC. Remember that command from an earlier video. I'm going to window in everything, and I'm going to specify the base point down here at the lower right, so it'll scale everything out this way. So I'm going to select the base point, and then down here I'm going to click my left click, right click, and paste that from the clipboard, and then hit enter. And so now now it should be 10,507 point. Well, we lost just a little bit due to precision, but close enough for what we're trying to accomplish here. So yeah, this video is getting a little long. So in the next video, we're going to talk about proportioning our scale ratio and capturing scenes. So until then, we'll see you in the next video.